Hey, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com here with my weekly series, my add-on podcast for the week, talking about resilience, because it's something that I'm getting into deeper and deeper as I run a course about developing resilience and talking to a lot of other experts on resilience and how they define resilience, how they talk about getting beyond the negative results or negative reaction to challenges in everyday life. And today I've got an author, a writer, a coach, a longtime student of feeling good, which he's got a book called The Practice of Feeling Good. Fletcher Ellingson, welcome
Hey,
to Great Dad Talks.
hey, thanks so much, and love the show and important conversations here. So cool.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm interested in your perspective on this. I know I don't think in the book, as far as I could see, you specifically use the word resilience, but I
Correct.
think that's kind of the interesting thing about this concept, because as I talk to some people, I talk to I talk to some people like bodybuilders, and for them, the first thing about resilience is like, I got to be tough. I got to run a marathon. I got to do all this stuff. And then other people are far more on I don't know what the other side of that is, but then the body stuff good, but the more important is the mental side and the mindset side. And I would say that you're probably in the latter, even though you
Yep.
feel like you're in good shape.
Yes, I'm definitely in the latter. Yeah, I think our mindset it influences everything in our life.
Yeah. So when you talk about feeling good, maybe reconcile that for me, or however you
Yeah.
want to describe it, how that relates to resilience.
Yeah. So under the umbrella of the concept of feeling good, and I rarely say happy. I rarely use
Yeah.
that descriptor, but that certainly falls underneath there. But feeling good might be meaning feeling connected. It might be feeling open, willing, inspired, courageous. It might be feeling secure, right? Or certain, and definitely resilient, because the practice of feeling good doesn't deny that upsets happen. It doesn't deny that challenges show up, right?
Sure.
And it doesn't mean that we're not going to have times that where we're not feeling good. I'm not like you have to be feeling good 100% of the time. But resilience is definitely under the umbrella of the practice of feeling good, right? It's that ability to come back from a story that had you, deep in the spirals. And really, at the practice of feeling good for me is the practice of bringing forth an empowering story to any situation. And for me, that's what is at the core of resilience. At the core of resilience is a story. And that story is either going to, if it's a story of resilience, it's going to bring you back. It's going to move you forward.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the fact that in talking about resilience, it's not about, like you say, it's not like Pollyanna-ish attitude, like everything is good, like the Panglossian kind of everything is the best, in the best of all possible worlds, just everything is a good thing, because there's a lot
Yes,
of stuff that isn't good. I mean, there's all the way
exactly.
from little small upsetments to all the way through tragedy, and it's important to talk to understand that and to take that in. That's all part of life. In your book, you talk about about doing investigation, looking hard at, I think what you're saying about looking hard at these stories, like the story that you're
Yes.
telling yourself, and trying to understand, maybe you can help me, is it
Yeah.
like research or really giving some thought to what you're actually saying in your mind to yourself, the story that you're telling yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So I encourage my clients to get curious about the stories that they're reviewing on a daily basis, right? So for many people, they may have an overarching story that life sucks and then you die, right?
Yeah.
Or I can never catch a break, right? I never win anything, right? I can never make that much money. How come I'm always getting the short end of the stick? I mean, they have this overarching umbrella story, and so I encourage them to go like, hey, let's get curious about that story. Number one, does it serve your life? Does it feel good? Does it inspire you? Does it motivate you? So we want to get curious about this overarching story. See, and then the thing is that, as you know, we think our stories are the truth. We live like our stories are the truth, and they're not the truth. So, right, I don't really believe in good, bad, right, or wrong. The question always comes back to, does this serve my life? Does it hold me back, or does it allow me to move forward? And so the practice of feeling good, or the practice of being resilient, is really getting curious about the stories that we're talking about. The people who we admire and esteem and love to cheer on, they are resilient.
Yeah.
And so get curious about what their story is,
Yeah.
right? What's that story that's allowing them to make the comeback that we're cheering on and that we're inspired by? Like, right, when we go to the movies, we love a good comeback story, right?
Yeah.
Well, that protagonist in the movie has a story, and that story is the fuel, if you will, right? And so yeah, so let's get curious about what's moving us forward or holding us back.
Yeah, and I think within, I mean, you talk about changing the program, and I think that's like the cornerstone of what coaching is, but is trying to change that story. I'm wondering, curious of whether you think that can be done by yourself, or whether you really need somebody objective to be asking you the questions, to be curious about you, your experience, to really dig in deep. Because you've got a book, obviously, and you'd love to have people read the book, but how much of that can be done on your own without help?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that people can get a good start. They can get a start in transforming an area of their life. But if you really want to create a sense of momentum, if you really want to, like, have a night and a night versus day kind of outcome, work with somebody. We're just too close to our own stuff, myself included, right? I'm always in a coaching program. I've spent ridiculous amounts of money. My mom's like, Fletcher, why on earth would you do that, right? But I tell my mom, working with these mentors has allowed me to, number one, generate a lot of money, right? Create the marriage of my dreams, mend relationships that needed mending, and create a great sense of health and vitality in my life, just to name a few things, right?
Yeah, well, I'm a coach, so I guess I bought into that, but I think there are so many places in life that we do that without even thinking. Like if we want to learn tennis, we don't go out there with a book and try to,
Yes.
how do you hold the racket? You go to somebody in that, not that they are going to make you into a star, but they are going to accelerate that learning.
Yes, exponentially accelerate, right? So yeah, great question.
So talking about the changing the program, is part of that developing new habits? I mean, we talked about the fact that curiosity, you've got to dig in deep and try to understand what these stories are. But are there habits that are part of that changing of the program?
Yeah, habits and more importantly for me are getting clear about what our standards are in
Mm.
life. Because a standard is what you're willing to settle for in an area of your life.
Oh,
So, for instance, a standard in my household is every day we make the bed as soon as we get up. It's a standard, right?
yeah.
It's just like that's what I'm willing to settle for. I'm not willing to settle for having an unmade bed. Now, some people say, "Oh gosh, what's the big deal, Fletcher?" It's not a big deal. Do you know that every time I walk into my room, I see my well-made bed and it feels good, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious about what my standards are, and I want to be able to articulate what my standards are. So I always tell my clients, if you can't articulate what your standard is about your health and fitness or your health and well-being or about your finances, we have standards about everything. So if you can't articulate them, you're most likely settling for something by default. And we want to get curious again, does that standard serve me? And if the standard doesn't serve you, for instance, I got my glass full of water here, okay? Because my standard is that I have to have a minimum of 60 ounces of water a day. Now, for some people, gosh, well, that's not very much. Well, it's my standard. And it's a lot more than I was drinking because a few years ago, I wound up in the ER with the kidney stone. And one of the questions that the physician asked me, they said, so Fletcher, we're just wondering if you ever drink any water because you're severely dehydrated,
Well,
right? So I said, well, gosh, I think I'm sure I drink water. Well, they said, well, how much? And then I was like, oh, I don't know. So my standard at that point was to not drink enough water, and I was okay with that until it developed into an issue and I had to go to the ER. Now my standard is very clear. I drink a minimum of 60 ounces of water a day and oftentimes much more. But that's my standard now. I'm clear about it. I can articulate it.
yeah. Well, we talk a lot in coaching about values and I guess standards in all different areas. I think they're at least in coaching, they're like establishing your values or establishing your why. Those things are very easy, or not, they're not easy to define, but when you define them, they clarify a lot of things. But would you advise people to go all the way from, listing standards from making the bed to drinking the water to having a, whatever it is, exercise every day, writing them all down, or
Yeah. And maybe just getting curious about a few things in your life, right? And take a baby step. See if you can articulate a couple standards. What's your standard around savings? Some people say, well, I like to have savings. I remember one of my clients, I asked, so what's your standard around savings? Oh, I really want to have a lot of money in my savings account. So my question was, how much do you have in there? Well, I mean, right now I don't have any. So I said, well, what's your standard for paying yourself on a monthly basis? I don't pay myself on a monthly basis. Oh, well, then that's your standard. You're willing to not pay yourself.
yeah,
So we started off with a baby step. Hey, after we get off this call, will you put a mason jar on your desk? Will you put $5 in it? Will you do that 4 times this month? So at the end of the month, you'll have $20. Now, that seems like a insignificant amount to some people or too big of a baby step. But the email that I got from this client one day, and I love these emails and texts or phone calls that start off like this: Fletcher, you're never going to believe what just happened. So this person was ecstatic at the end of the year because they had $1,200 in their savings account.
yeah,
That's a big deal for that person, right? And that's what happens when we get clear enough about our standards that we can actually articulate them. Standards are not goals, right? They're not goals. Standards are what you're willing to settle for.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So in this case of the savings thing, he established a minimum amount that felt like he was, at least in the financial realm of the savings realm, that there was that standard. I guess for me, it's like,
Yes.
I ride my bike to the Golden Gate Bridge and back every day. That's my standard. I sometimes fail at that. I get, maybe five out of the 7 days.
I
But
love that.
that's how I've developed that's my standard.
That's awesome. Yeah, your standard, you can articulate it. Hey,
Right.
I ride my bike to the Golden Gate Bridge a minimum of 5 times a week.
Yeah.
That's,
It's more
I mean, that's
impressive when you know that I live in Denver, but no, I live in
right, right.
so
So good,
go
well
ahead.
done.
Well, and so it sounds like that has some intersection with the idea of atomic habits, little habits. I'm not a student of that area, but maybe you are.
It's that consistently taking those baby steps,
Right.
right? Setting yourself up for success by making small goals that are very accessible, right? These are not stretch goals. These
Not
are,
like how
let's,
to make the bed.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And little by little, then as you develop that habit of making the bed, emptying the dishwasher, and all the other little things that kind of
Yes.
go along with it.
Yeah. And that's another great one. My standard is that every morning when the dishes have been washed in the dishwasher, we empty it. It's a standard, right? We're not just hoping somebody else does, or we let it ride until the evening. No, in the morning, they're clean. We unload it so they're ready for it's my preference. It's my standard.
Yeah. And I know you've got 5 kids. They're grown like mine are now. But did you use that same idea? I mean, I know a lot of people talk about differentiating, our family versus other families, because you always, with kids, they always say, well, Dave's family, he gets to do X, Y, Z. And I've always heard that the best response to that is, well, that's their family. Our family has different standards in this case.
You got it. You got it. Exactly. Yeah. So our children have heard this conversation before.
Yeah.
And they're living into it. And that's wonderful. We have like two of our kids are extremely into working out. It's their standard. They're not, they work out X amount of times a week. That's their standard. They don't go below that. And they're very, very committed to that. So yeah, so they're very well addressed in these personal development conversations, much to their chagrin. When they were younger, they're like, oh my gosh, do we have to listen to that again? But now I love getting those phone calls and hearing them implement some of these ideas that they've grown up with.
Yeah, it is heartwarming when they get a little bit older and they thank you for having repeated something over and over, so that they feel like that's part of them, and they realize where they got some, hopefully some positive trait.
Yes.
Part of resilience. So part of resilience, we say, is the state of, and I try to avoid that word happiness, but what loosely is considered happiness, the absence of regret, disappointment, anxiety, and more of these positive values, which you do a really good job of listing all the ones out, that different feelings that you can have. But we're always faced with these challenges. There's hurts and little slights all the time and disappointments. And so you have a chapter about practicing overcoming upset. So
Yes.
this is kind of the resilient part. That's you're in a state of mind, but you get flipped into a negative one, and then how do you bounce back?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, we use I put a condensed version or abbreviated version in the book. It's called the 4C methodology. And when I go through it with my clients, it's actually up to 6 or 7 C's now. But for the abbreviated version, the first thing to do when we have an upset is, when we get angry or upset, the brain begins to shut, our cognitive abilities begin to shut down, right? We know this. This is like science, like they shut down. And so so for men especially, myself included, I'm like, when I'm upset, sometimes I can't remember, like, what are we even arguing about? What's going on here? Like, there's a sense of bewilderment and like, how did we arrive in this? What are we talking about? So the first thing to do is to get calm, right? Because we need to, our nervous system is deregulated. We need to begin to regulate it. The fastest way to do that is to begin to breathe, right? To relax and breathe. This brings our body back into a state of calm. The system goes back online for thinking and problem solving, right? It begins to go back on. It's like a computer, like, oh, now we can begin to think. So that calm is the first step. And then, now that we can think again, we go back to that magical word, curiosity. Let's get curious about what's going on for the other person, and myself included. Like, why did I have that reaction? Let's really own it. Why did I have that reaction to what they said or did? And what's going on for the other person? Let me get curious. Let me stand in their shoes for just a moment to see, like, how it is for them. And then the magic about this, Paul, is that when we get curious about other people, we can drop some of our judgment. Oh, that's what their concern is. Oh, I see. Right? We're taking time to get curious. Then we can see their concern. And then here's where something absolutely beautiful happens. When we understand why a person is acting the way they are acting, we can then move into the next C, which is compassion. And we become compassionate instead of judgmental. And when we're in a place of compassion, the conversation can suddenly change dramatically and evolve into something. And then finally, the fourth C in this abbreviated version is creative. Now we can create something that we hadn't yet created because we were upset and we were judgmental. But now we're compassionate, we're concerned, we're open and willing. Now we can begin to create. And I'll actually ask my clients, and I do this myself in my own marriage, like, hey, what do we want to create now? Because we don't want to just let the discussion fizzle out. Like, what can we powerfully create together moving forward? And that is important because it unifies the people that in the upset, right? It's now we're bonding, now we're creating together. And that's a beautiful and feel good experience.
Yeah. Yeah, in my experience, it isn't quite as clear on how to do that. It takes some practice, some work on how to make that flow naturally.
Yes.
Yeah. So I challenge people to give that a try, to go through those 4 steps, but don't expect that suddenly, your partner is going to jump into your arms and say, thank you very much. It's
Exactly. And that's why it's called the practice of feeling good,
practice.
right? I mean, it is a big emphasis on the word practice. Like,
Yeah.
I'm still practicing like this methodology. And one of the things we do in our marriage is I'll just flat out say, sometimes I'll have a reaction and I'm like, oh gosh, you know what, babe? That is not actually how I wanted to respond to that. And and the terminology that we use in our family is like, hey, can I have a redo on that?
Yeah.
And she'll say, yeah. And so and my next phrase is, okay, cue me up. So I ask her to say the exact same thing that triggered me.
Yeah.
Because it triggered me. It's nothing on her, right? And so I'll say, cue me up, and then I will respond after I've had a chance to think about it in the actual manner that I wish I had responded.
Mm-hmm.
And so and we actually like literally practice that.
Part of this too, and I'm just picking, some things out of your book. There's a lot more in the book I want to make sure that people are clear about. But there's a chapter here on resentment, and I know
Yes.
resentment plays a huge role in a lot of people's ongoing unhappiness. They let the things that happened years and years ago still tug at them. And I don't think we'd be human if we didn't all have moments, in the middle of the night where we kick ourselves for something that like happened in high school and we can't let it go. And so you talk about that. Maybe you could mention a little bit how to transform resentment into something more positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll define it and then I'll give you the two-step methodology. So I'm just reading from my book here. I define resentment as a multi-layered resistance-based story, which results in an intensely judgmental and disempowering reaction. It's usually when we feel like we've been mistreated, right? Or harmed or something. And it's this intense emotional experience. And it doesn't feel good. It ruins marriages. It ruins relationships, right? It's just resentment is really dark. It's really
Even if
hurtful.
objectively you were wrong, even if your wife or your partner did
Yes.
something really horrible,
Yes.
yeah, it
It,
doesn't take away the fact that may have been that you're not imagining things.
yes. Thank you for adding that. That's important. I'm not saying that you may not have been wronged. Okay. I'm not saying that at all. But the resentment only poisons us, right? It's bottled up in us. Our resentment has very little effect on other people. They may not even know we're resenting them, right? It's making us sick. It's poisoning us. So there's a two-step methodology. Again, this is abbreviated, but it's in a nutshell. And number one, so the decision is I am deciding to surrender my resentment. And the way I imagine surrender is like laying down your arms. Hey, surrender, lay down your arms. We're surrendering because another way of saying that is surrender that which no longer is serving me. We're laying down that which no longer is serving us. And so we recognize this resentment that I'm holding on to, it's not serving me. It's like making me sick. Okay. So decision number one, I'm deciding to lay down that which no longer serves me. And decision number two, and in my book, I like, before I say this, I really like to preface people like really get in an open place to hear this, what I'm about to say, because it's a bold, audacious, radical step. And step two is we decide that people are doing the best they can with all their given programming, with all their tools, with all their upbringing, with all their fears, right? With all their, whatever they have, they're doing the best they can with the tools they have given all their life experience. Now, when I say this, certain people say, oh, Fletcher, no way. That person driving in front of me, they're not doing the best they can. Those parents over there, they're not doing the best. They're doing the best they can given all of their life experience and all the experience that they haven't had. It's just like my phone, my iPhone here. It has an operating system and it's full of applications. And that phone and those applications can only produce results that they're programmed to produce.
Sure.
They cannot produce outside of their programming. So consider that we just simply have an operating system full of programming, and it can only produce results that are within the confines of that programming. So when we realize this, now, and again, Paul, you said something important earlier that I want to bring back to this conversation. It doesn't mean that people's best is not illegal or hurtful, right?
Or evil.
Or evil or terrible, right? Exactly. And yet that is their best. And what I mean by that is if I were in their shoes and had their exact same upbringing, I would be doing the same thing because I would have that programming. When we realize this, it again allows a sense of judgment to melt away or compassion to arise, compassion and understanding. And then we can create something different. And probably the most important thing about all of this is that this applies to ourselves. Imagine, Paul, if we could do this with ourselves, to stop resenting, oh God, why was I'm such a dork. Why did I do that? Oh God, how come I messed that up? How come I can't get that right? Oh, and just why, Fletcher, get it together. All of these harsh things that we say to ourselves have a very real toll on our nervous system.
Yep.
Right? And we begin to not even feel safe and trust ourselves. And so when we can let that resentment go, become compassionate and curious, then we can begin to create. We're all doing the best we can with the tools and programming that we have and that which we do not have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm hearing a lot of empathy in there. Like
Yeah.
you said, or is it just such a thing, empathy for for other people, empathy for yourself. Very key in a lot of stuff that I do as well.
Yeah,
Just touching on one last thing before we
sure.
go, because I run a course on this, and I'm also a student of this subject, which is gratitude, and
Oof.
what the role of gratitude plays in resilience, because they feel like they're two different things, kind of. But
Yes.
gratitude is, I don't know, it's not thought of a lot, I don't think, but it's such an incredibly powerful practice, I find.
Oh my gosh, I'm with you on this, Paul. And here's what I think. Gratitude is the cleanest burning fuel that we
Yeah,
have,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the way I like to describe gratitude is the acknowledgement and appreciation for something outside of ourselves for which we cannot take credit.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
So
think
there's
of this
no
statement,
pride or none of the sins of ownership.
right? And it's like I'm appreciating and acknowledging that for which I cannot take credit. That is almost 99% of everything in my life. As I'm looking around my room, even right here, Paul, the screen on which I'm talking, I have not made any of this. The sun, the nature, the roads I drive on, the books in the library, I've made none of it. The food I get at the stores. I mean, I can barely take credit for any, I mean, I can't even take credit for my blood flow, the oxygen I breathe. My body's working without any permission from me. It just does it on its own, right? It's when we get that our world is unfolding without without our permission or involvement, it is overwhelmingly just mind-blowing. And that I feel grateful for. I get to be here for the experience of it.
Yeah.
It's like I won the lottery, right? I
Right.
won the lottery. Woohoo! I'm grateful for that.
So what do you think the intersection is between that and resilience? Because I know it does power a lot of the emotions that we were talking about earlier that are the feel-good emotions. But do
Yes.
you think that how does the gratitude stop you from crumbling or stop you from falling into resentment, stop you from bouncing back?
So good question. So what happens when we change the story, going from one of scarcity to one of abundance and gratitude? What happens, and the reason it's so powerful, is that because we're literally changing the chemical reaction in our brain. Your emotion is simply a chemical reaction, right? Serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine. These three chemicals are the feel-good chemicals. What you focus on, you feel. And I know that's a common statement, right? But what it actually means is that your brain has no choice. It must create an emotional / chemical reaction that aligns with the story you're focused on.
Mhm.
It must create an emotion that aligns with the story you're focused on. So this is like an incredible opportunity for us, because if you want to create feel good emotions on demand, it means place your focus on a feel good story. When we go to the movie theater, for instance, we experience a roller coaster of emotions: fear, surprise, awe, romance, right? Sadness, conflict. We experience it all. And that's in relation to simply watching light on a screen. It's not even real, but your brain doesn't know the difference. It's busy creating those chemical reactions. If you were hooked up to a heart rate monitor during a movie, you would see your heart rate like spiking and dipping and spiking and dipping based on where you're putting your focus, because you're constantly changing the levels of the chemicals in your brain. And that courses through your nervous system.
Yeah.
Right?
I like the analogy that like you're filling up the tank constantly in gratitude, and that when you hit a wall, you have more of a storage, you have more of a capacity to respond positively because you have that gratitude for everything that isn't involved with the current challenge.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Yeah. So you could take that one step further. And I'm sure you do this with your clients, like asking them like, hey, how's your gratitude tank? Is it full? Is it 3/4? Are you
Right.
running on fumes?
Yeah.
Is it time to refuel? And the beautiful thing about refueling gratitude, doesn't cost anything.
Yeah. You look out the window and see a bird or a sky or
Yeah.
whatever.
It
Yeah.
just takes practice, right? We have to have some intention. It takes practice.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. We covered a lot more ground than just specifically on what resilience is. A lot of different components here. I can tell that you're a great coach because you're bringing the rational and the emotional into this conversation, which is part of the human experience. We don't deal with just one or the other. I really enjoyed reading your book, The Practice of Feeling Good. There's a lot of good stuff in there. It's a different way of presenting some of the information that I do in my positive intelligence course, but a lot of it is the same type of thing, is this basic idea that you're going to be not only happier, but healthier. You're going to have more positive emotions, positive relationships if you start developing these habits of recognizing and then learning new ways to respond, new creative ways to respond that further those relationships. So thank you again for taking the time. You can find the book on Amazon, The Practice of Feeling Good. You can go to FletcherEllingson.com for your other activities. You do coaching, you've got a podcast, you've got other public speaking engagements as well. So check all that out.
Yeah. And Paul, I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you for being a source of kindness and contribution and putting, feel good and important content into our world. I love just the concept of great dad talks, because dads really do need this, and men in general, and our children need it, and we need strong role models. So thank you very much for what you do.
Well, I appreciate that. I think we all play a role in just small acts of putting ourselves out there and reaffirming these messages that are positive and reaffirming for all types of people. So thanks again, Fletcher Ellingson, for joining us. You can find my coaching and some of the programs that I have, including the gratitude and the program that mimics some of the stuff that you've been talking about, at GreatDad.com/go. Okay, until next week, take care.